You've seen the movie Castaway, and obviously now you're a bit of an expert on how to survive on a deserted island in the middle of the ocean. You first do some recon to see if anyone else is on the island and if there's anything to eat, like bananas conveniently dangling from trees or any wandering animals. Nothing. It seems you'll have to fashion a spear so that you might do some shallow water fishing. Well, that turns out to be more difficult than you thought. At least you managed to collect some rainwater after a shower, using a large leaf as a receptacle. You're also well aware that if you don't find something head-shaped and proceed to draw eyes on it and a nose, you might lose your mind. You call him Rocky, or if it's a girl, you might call her Coco or Shelly. In reality, your chances of surviving on an uninhabited island for a long time are slim. If you got washed up without any tools, you might find yourself in a bit of a pickle. Even if you did find the most important thing, drinkable water, you're still going to have to build a shelter, make a tool for hunting, and actually be able to hunt. Indeed, if there is anything available to kill. But some people have survived, and now we will introduce you to one Captain Thomas Musgrave, a man whose story is nothing short of amazing. He was born in England in 1832, but at the young age of 16 he set out to sail the seas for the first time. He made a career out of this, but when his ship, the Grafton, left Australia on the 12th of November 1863 to go out and search for mining and sealing opportunities, his life would change forever. A crew of just 5 first headed off to Campbell Island, which is part of New Zealand's sub-Antarctic islands. Quite frankly, it's in the middle of nowhere, but on that island it was believed that there would be tin to mine, and so off the guys went. They had a backup plan too, because if tin wasn't found, they could at least do a bit of seal hunting and on their return, sell the furs and oil. Sometimes life throws a curveball at you, and after reaching that remote place, the guys couldn't find any tin to mine. And on top of that, it seems the seals hadn't turned up for the hunting party. They couldn't go back empty-handed since explorations were an expensive endeavor. They decided to head back to Auckland Island and explore there. It was a Thursday, on December 31st, 1863. Not a good day for a sailor. Strong winds battered the ship. The water broke in all directions and a thick fog surrounded the vessel. These bad conditions remained, but on New Year's Day, the men got sight of the island. As they approached, they saw a large number of seals, so that lifted the men's moods. But then the bad weather again started to batter the ship. They managed to drop both anchors, but in the strong winds, heavy rain, and rough seas, they couldn't steady the ship. At around midnight, a violent gale blew the ship against the rocks. The water rushed into the ship, and in no time, the ocean was spilling onto the deck. The men abandoned all hope of pumping the water out and instead gathered up as many provisions as they could. The ship was wrecked. It was a lost cause. They did get close enough to the island to get their things and leave the ship though. They were at least alive, but none of those 5 men could envision what awaited them. With them, they had some food. They had tools as well as a gun and gunpowder. For a shelter, they could use bits of the ship, including the sails. They got to work. A week passed and the men hadn't been able to get much done due to awful weather and vicious winds. But when things cleared up, they got to work on the shelter. With timber from the boat as well as cloth from the sails, it wasn't that hard to knock up a shelter. It helped that one of the crew members had experience in this, and he at least had a combination hammer, something similar to an axe and a drill. In time, they had a stable cabin to live in. Soon it would have a chimney so they could have a fire in the place, and that let the smoke out. It had a table, and to sleep on, the men made what looked like stretchers. Weeks passed and the provisions were running out, but those seals, they were virtually everywhere, and the men listened to them roar as they slept, which was like music to their ears. In fact, when they woke up, there'd be seals right outside their shelter, so the closest one got it and ended up seal meat. Living only on seal meat wasn't exactly the best diet, and the men didn't want to come down with scurvy, so they started looking for other food sources. Luckily, around the island there were widgeons, which are kinda like ducks. Those were very tasty. The guys also found that older seals tasted horrible, but if you could get a cub that had never even been in the water, it was delicious. On eating that for the first time, Musgrave remarked, "It tastes like lamb." The larger seals, it turned out, didn't much like those 2-legged animals taking their cubs, and on occasion, they put up a fight. They were soon scared off when the men fired a gun. It wasn't always seal for dinner though. The guys also ate a lot of fish and crabs. As deserted islands go, this wasn't the worst of places at times. Nonetheless, as the months passed, the men started wondering how long it would take for an expedition to find them, if anyone was looking for them at all. The fact was, those guys had long been thought of as dead. Only 2 months had passed when Musgrave wrote this in his diary. "I am in exceedingly low spirits today, and I know that one loved one in Sydney is so also. For I have no doubt but by this time they have given me up for lost, and what is to become of my own dear wife and children? May God, to whom they can now look for comfort, watch over and protect them, is my constant and fervent prayer. I shall never forgive myself for coming on this enterprise. What could they do to pass the time? Well, they worked on that house of theirs, and with all the timber they needed, they made a pretty decent abode. It kept out the cold, had an area for working, a kitchen area, and a warm fire. On top of that, they'd managed to keep the mosquitoes out, and that had been an annoyance. Some seal clubbing days, things didn't always go to plan. In fact, on one particular day, a tiger seal had taken offense to the clubbing of one of his young friends, and one of the men had to hide up a tree until the others came to his rescue. What Musgrave would call pitched battles with seals would become quite a regular occurrence. After months passed, the major battle was misery. The days were long, and the weather was terrible, and the men lost all hope of ever leaving the island. They played games and they made up their own dominoes, but there was only so much they could do to keep their spirits up. Their spirits were lifted considerably when one of the men made a huge breakthrough. What was that, you might ask? The answer is the man had successfully made his own hooch, a kind of prison beer that didn't taste too bad. He made this from a flower that grew all over the island, which he then fermented. They now had beer on tap for as long as they wanted, and it also became another part of their mixed diet. After a few months and a lot of drinks, they also had taught the parrots they had to talk, which was some amusement for them. Still, on May 15th, Musgrave wrote, "Oh my God, how long is this to last? Oh, release me from this bondage. Night and morning, day and in my dreams, I offer up my prayers to thee." They had better fishing techniques, but then in June the seals disappeared and their main food source was gone. The water was warmer and the seals spent most of their time in the water. Hunting them became difficult. Now came the hunger. Months passed and the seals finally returned. The men had food, but no hope of ever seeing a ship sail close to the island. In October, Musgrave wrote, "It would be impossible for me to convey to anyone an idea of my present state of mind. I am anything but mad. If that would come, it would very likely afford relief." It was that month that the men realized that they had to get off the island. Food wasn't always available, and there were periods of terrible hunger. Their health was affected, but some had been injured while out hunting and surveying. Things weren't looking good. Building a ship to sail through rough waters isn't quite as easy as the movies depict, and without an expert or even a carpenter, Musgrave wrote that the idea of just making a ship that wouldn't sink in a second seemed farcical to him. Nonetheless, the men collected as many parts of the wreckage as they could and discussed how they'd build this thing. If anything, they had time in the day to think and build. Besides bouts of hunger, the men managed to start putting something together that looked seaworthy. Musgrave wrote, "I hope we may succeed. It's quite true that by energetic perseverance, men may perform wonders, and our success would by no means constitute a miracle. The men are all very sanguine, and I have no doubt but we shall be able to make something that will carry us to New Zealand." Sanguine means positive, if you didn't know that. Over a year had passed and there had been failed attempts to launch their homemade boat. Some days were spent fixing that thing, and others were spent in hunger and looking for grubs to eat. Musgrave put his diary down for months, and then in spring he picked it back up again. The men are in what he calls a deplorable state, skinny and dressed in rags. They face grim starvation at times and almost want to gnaw on their own hands. In June, Musgrave wrote, "We were all seized with a violent attack of dysentery about the same time. This we have all recovered from, but I am left with rheumatic pains and cramps, which will in all probability cling to me through life." But it's time to launch the boat. Even though they accept there is little probability of success, they will not survive much longer on the island, but the thought of drowning also weighs heavily on their minds. One thing that did lift their spirits was the discovery of a cat, which stayed with them while they finished their vessel. On the 27th of June, they launched the boat, which was so frightening some of the men wanted to return to the island. After attempts to sail were made, it was clear that 5 men were just too heavy, and it was decided that 2 men would be left behind, and if the others made it home, they would send out a ship to collect them. The 3 finally managed to sail to Stewart Island, which was inhabited. There, they met a Captain Cross, the first human they'd seen in 18 months. This is what Musgrave wrote. "When we landed, I could not stand, but was led up to that gentleman's house, where something to eat was immediately prepared for us, of which I partook very sparingly, for I felt ill and unable to eat." Weeks passed, but the men and Captain Cross eventually made it back to the island, where they hoped the 2 men that were left behind were still alive. This is how Musgrave described the joyous meeting. "One of them, the cook, on seeing me, turned as pale as a ghost and staggered up to a post, against which he leaned for support, for he was evidently on the point of fainting, while the other, George, seized my hand in both of his and gave my arm a severe shaking, crying, 'Captain Musgrave, how are ye? How are ye?' What's more incredible is that 4 months after those men had been shipwrecked on that island, another ship had been destroyed and another group of sailors were trying to survive on another part of the island. Both groups had no idea the other was on the island. On that other ship, only 19 of the 25 men got to shore and the others drowned. They didn't have the same luck and there was less to eat, and in the end, only 3 survived when they were seen by a passing ship. Some died of starvation, others were abandoned. In their case, it was every man for himself rather than the collaboration Musgrave enjoyed with his men. One of the 3 survivors said things were grim, and at one point 2 men got in a fight and one killed the other. The next morning, the winner of that fight was eating the loser. If you like tales of survival, we have some other amazing stories of a different type of survival for you. Try one of these amazing videos: Chernobyl Suicide Squad, 3 men who prevented even worse nuclear disaster, or the only man to survive 2 nuclear bombs.